Although I don't work in a motel, I travel frequently for my employment. I recently had to stay a few nights in a hotel I was familiar with. It was a peaceful town, an ancient and attractive place. It had been owned by my aunt and uncle, and I had many happy childhood memories of staying there. Over the years, not much had changed at the hotel. The air had a subtle scent of old books and lavender, and the wooden floorboards continued to groan. Located on the second story, my room overlooked the courtyard. It was modest but comfortable, with a wooden dresser, a little writing desk beside the window, and a huge quilted bed. In order to enjoy the cold breeze and the calming sounds of the fountain below, I liked to leave the window slightly open at night. I slept quickly the first night, but I woke up at midnight to the sound of furniture being moved in the room above mine. It sounded like someone slowly dragging something across the floor like a heavy chair. The noise went on for hours, and at first I assumed it was simply another visitor moving around. I covered my head with a pillow, but it did not help. I eventually fell back asleep from pure tiredness. I brought up the loudness with the young woman at reception the following morning, and she smiled kindly. She informed me that there was nobody in the room above mine, seeming perplexed. It has been empty for weeks. I dismissed it, supposing it may have come from someplace else. Perhaps the old pipes were malfunctioning. That was exactly what occurred that evening. I was about to fall asleep when the sounds returned. The sound of furniture being dragged and scraped reverberated through the roof. I couldn't help but be interested this time. After putting on my slippers, I headed to the lobby in search of the night security officer. He agreed to inspect the room above mine. He was an elderly man with a composed manner. We went to the third level in the squeaky elevator. Our footsteps were muted by the carpet, and the corridor was poorly illuminated. We entered once the security officer unlocked the door. As the receptionist had mentioned, the room was unoccupied. The furniture was in its customary location, lightly dusted. There were no indications that anyone had visited. The guard gave me his word that he would keep an eye on things when we got back to the lobby. Returning to my room, I was unable to fall asleep. I was startled by every small sound. I couldn't stop picturing the furniture above me shifting by itself, as if a mysterious power was reorganizing the room. I was so tired the next day that I changed rooms. I was transferred to the opposite wing, far away from the source of the noise, by the understanding hotel personnel. My new room, which overlooked the garden rather than the courtyard, was as comfortable. I felt comfortable for the first time in many days. I read a book in bed after taking a lengthy hot shower. As the night grew calm, I began to unwind, believing that the worst was behind me. But I heard it again as I was about to nod off. It was my new room above, and it had the same dragging sound. I lay there listening to the unsettling noise, my heart hammering in my chest. It appeared to be moving, like someone was trying really hard to annoy me. It was more than I could handle. Reaching for my phone, I dialed the front desk. With a worried tone, the receptionist promised to send the security guard up right away. A few minutes later, my door was knocked on. The guard was still there, his expression much more solemn than before. Together, we headed upstairs, but once more there was nobody in the room above mine. The sentry examined every crevice, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He advised me to attempt getting some sleep and promised to keep an eye on the hallways all night. Once I was back in my room, I was depressed. What was making all of these sounds? What made them follow me around the hotel to the opposite side? As I lay in bed, I tried to make sense of everything by gazing up at the ceiling. The noise persisted, unrelenting and disconcerting. The cacophony slowly subsided as daylight approached, and I slept off. The light shone and everything appeared normal once again when I woke up. I was relieved to check out of the hotel and packed my belongings, but I still felt uneasy. I couldn't get rid of the sensation that something wasn't right there as I was leaving. The hotel, which had previously seemed like a second home, was suddenly cloaked in mystery and fear. A part of me was relieved to get rid of it, even if I worried whether I would ever learn what had made those noises. I still remember the event from every hotel stay I have. I can still hear the sound of furniture moving in an empty room from those evenings. It serves as a reminder that not all mysteries are best left unanswered, and that even familiar locations might conceal secrets. That night is still quite clear in my memory. It was a chilly and breezy evening in our rough community. At the time, I was just 12 years old, and my name is Mary. My mom and my younger brother Tommy shared a home with me. Dad was gone for work, as he always was, and we were accustomed to taking care of things on our own. However, this evening was distinct. It was maybe midnight or even later. The trees created eerie shadows on the walls, while the wind howled outside. Tommy and I had already gone to bed, but I was restless. A noise startled me as I lay awake, looking at the ceiling. A gentle tap on the front door was heard. I initially believed I had dreamed it. However, I heard it once more. My heart began to pound. At what hour might it be someone? I snuck out of bed and took a quick look down the corridor. Mom was listening while standing still. She had a troubled expression. When she spotted me, she said, "Stay in your room, Mary." But I was immobile. I saw as she opened the closet and took out my father's old shotgun. My mother had never been so terrified. She walked to the door while keeping a firm grip on the rifle. "Who is present?" Her voice wavered as she let out a cry. There was only more knocking and no response. She peered through the spy hole, but nothing caught her eye. Mom inhaled deeply before slightly opening the door. Nobody was present. Her hands shaking, she hurriedly closed the door and locked it. She said to me, "Go back to bed." But she was clearly afraid too. I returned to my room, but I remained awake. I remained conscious, taking in every noise. We saw something odd outside the following morning. In the ground next to our house, there were footprints. They were strange, like if he had been hauling something heavy, but they were large, like a man's. Also, we discovered barbed wire entangled in the shrubbery close to our front yard. I shuddered at the piercing, rusty sound it made. After Mom made the police call, they arrived at our residence. They snapped photos while examining the barbed wire and the footprints. Mom and the police officers had a lengthy conversation. They were anxious as well, I could tell. They advised us to lock the windows and doors and to exercise caution. We discussed the events of the day. Tommy felt something wasn't right, even if he didn't fully comprehend. His small hand clung to mine as he remained near my mother and me. We didn't get much sleep that night. We jumped at every sound. We discovered something a few days later that increased the level of fear. A few homes down was a neighbor of ours. Mr. David was the name of the elderly man. We didn't give it much thought, although he always appeared a little off. However, a neighbor of ours told us something that instantly chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Peters mentioned that Mr. David has been behaving irritated recently. He was carrying a large, hefty object when she observed him strolling about at night. He didn't appear normal. Mom thanked her and pushed us through the door. She appeared more anxious than before. She remarked that we must exercise caution. Do not go outside by yourself. Stay with someone. More bizarre occurrences began to catch our attention. On some nights, we would hear sounds outside like a person strolling around our home. Tommy once discovered an unusual antique doll in our backyard. I felt terrible looking at it since it was damaged and filthy. Mom told Dad everything over the phone. It would take him a few more days to return home, but he promised to come as soon as he could. We had to wait till then to be safe. I once woke up to the sound of smashing glass. Leaping out of bed, I made my way to Mom's room. She had gotten up and was grasping the shotgun. She said, "Stay behind me." We moved gently toward the living room, which was the source of the noise. The chilly breeze swept in through the damaged window. With trembling hands, Mom aimed the shotgun at the shattered glass. She yelled out, "Who's there?" An answer was not forthcoming. Footsteps racing away were heard, and then nothing. Mom dialed the police once more, and they arrived right away. They looked all throughout the home, but nobody was there. When the cops had departed, Mom remarked, "We need to leave. This place is unsafe." We hurriedly packed our belongings. Mom informed Dad what had transpired over the phone. He concurred that we needed to depart. We spent some time staying with my aunt and uncle. Though I still had nightmares about that night, it seemed safer there. Dad eventually returned home a few days later. For the first time in days, I felt protected as he gave us a firm hug. He spoke with Mr. David and the cops. The cops discovered that Mr. David had been entering our home covertly. They brought him in for questioning because of his history of concerning conduct. We never returned to the residence. We relocated to a different area, distant from the dark evenings and Mr. David. It was a while before we felt secure once more. What mattered was that we were together. I still occasionally reflect on that evening, the footsteps, the barbed wire, and the knock on the door. Although it all seems like a horrible dream, I learned to be courageous and to have faith in my family from it. We would constantly look out for one another. I was alone myself on a windy night. I made the decision to camp in the woods by myself. I wanted solitude outside of the bustling metropolis. For protection, I packed food, camping supplies, and my dependable old gun. I took a car to a secluded campground tucked away in the woods. I had visited the location a few times previously. I had never gone camping by myself, though. I got there late in the afternoon. Long shadows were being thrown through the trees by the still-up sun. The birds tweeting and the rustle of leaves were the only noises in the crisp air. I pitched my tent in a little area encircled by towering pine trees. The location was ideal, far from any paths and other campers. Once my tent was up and my belongings were organized, I made the decision to go get firewood. It was getting close to dusk, and I wanted to make a fire before it got too dark. I picked up twigs and dried branches as I strolled through the woods. I came upon something odd when I left my tent and continued traveling. I noticed someone strolling through the woods from a distance. This individual wasn't on the track, which made it strange. They were making their way through the deep woodland at a leisurely, rather aimless pace. A shiver went down my spine. Who may that be? Why were they making that kind of trek through the woods? I ignored the uncomfortable feeling and carried on gathering wood. It's probably just another camper investigating the area, I reminded myself. After gathering enough wood, I returned to my encampment. I started the fire as the sun began to set. Light and warmth were provided by the dancing and crackling flames. I made a straightforward dinner and relaxed by the fire while I was by myself. The stars started to show in the night sky, and the woodland surrounding me grew gloomy. I started to unwind since it was so calm. I made the decision to go to bed after I finished my supper. With only a few burning embers remaining, I extinguished the fire and made my way inside my tent. Apart from the odd hoot of an owl or the sound of tiny creatures rustling in the undergrowth, the forest was silent. With my sleeping bag snug around me, I felt secure in my tent. I must have slept for a few hours since there was an odd sound when I woke up. It was a melodious, sweet whistling. I initially believed I was dreaming. Still, the whistling persisted. It appeared to be coming from my camp's immediate vicinity. My heart began to pound. Who the heck could be out here in the middle of the night whistling? With my gun in hand, I carefully unzipped the tent. As soon as I went outside, the whistling ceased. I scanned my surroundings, my eyes straining to focus in the gloom. The fire had subsided, leaving only the moon's tepid glow for illumination. I listened intently, but my breathing was the only thing audible. Then I noticed a man standing at the edge of the clearing out of the corner of my eye. A figure was there, just discernible in the shadows. He was simply observing me from his position. A wave of panic shot through me and I raised my weapon out of reflex. The man stayed still. I yelled, sounding unsteady, "Who is present?" There was no reply. The man remained still, motionless and quiet. With my finger on the trigger, I continued to aim my rifle at him. We looked at one another for what seemed like an eternity. The man turned and slowly walked away, vanishing into the jungle. I held my weapon at a high angle and heard his footsteps become silent. I stayed away from my tent. I kept close to the fire, adding fuel to keep it glowing brightly. For the remainder of the night, I watched the shadows with my eyes darting all over the place. There was no whistling again. The figure vanished from my sight. I broke camp as soon as the first rays of morning appeared through the woods. I didn't want to spend any more time there. With my heart still racing from the encounter, I hiked back to my car. The trip home seemed to take longer than normal as my thoughts were constantly going over what had happened that evening. I informed my pals what had happened when I got home, saying it was probably just another camper playing pranks on me. A few of them laughed it off. Some others speculated that it may have been a hunter or perhaps a local, but I felt in my heart that it was more than that. The way the man stood there observing me in the dark, there was something unnerving about it. Since then, I haven't returned to that camping location. It seemed scary and frightening in the woods, which had formerly been a peaceful and alone spot. That night's memories lingered with me, serving as a constant reminder of how exposed we may be when we're on our own in the wilderness. I was 13 years old in 2019, and my family and I lived next to a forest. Our little home was encircled by towering trees that seemed to be whispering secrets all around us. My life was permanently transformed one night. The night was stormy. Lightning blazed across the sky and rain pattered against the windows. My dad was very ill, and my mom, brother, and sister were in the hospital with him. I tried to seem bold, all by myself at home. To pass the time, I sat on the couch and watched TV. Without my family, the place seemed spacious and empty. Everything felt more ominous due to the deepening shadows and the noises of the approaching storm outside. As the wall clock began to tick noisily, I made an effort to concentrate on the show. It suddenly sounded to me. My name was called by someone. A murmur came from above. "Tommy." I became motionless. The TV was still on, but it was no longer audible to me. The voice was very clear and genuine. I listened while turning off the TV. "Tommy," it called once more. My heart pounded. Who may that be? I was meant to be by myself. I plucked up the bravery to decide to find out. I took my time climbing the rickety wooden steps, making a loud sound with every step. I needed to switch on the light because it was dark in the hallway. First, I headed to my room. Just as I had left it, it was empty. Next, I looked in my brother's room. It was likewise devoid of everything. The voice appeared to be coming from my parents' room at the end of the corridor. The door stood slightly ajar. I opened it and looked in. Only the little light from the corridor peeked into the gloomy chamber. I went inside and said, "Hello?" Nobody took a response. I looked beneath the bed and in the closet, but nobody was there. A shiver went down my spine. The voice was gone now, but it had seemed so close. Uneasy, I made the decision to return downstairs. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of something as I turned to exit the room. A silhouette shifted outside the glass. My heart was racing and I had a sense of immobility. I approached the window gently and peered out. It was raining so fiercely that visibility was poor. But suddenly the yard was illuminated by a bolt of lightning. There it was, a person standing close to the forest's edge. I knew someone was there, even though it was too dark to see who it was. Fear took hold. After racing downstairs, I secured every door. I reached for the phone to give my mother a call, but the signal was weak. The service must have been interrupted by the storm. I was afraid and felt stuck. Seeing as how I could see the front and back doors, I made the decision to stay in the living room. In order to have a better view outdoors, I switched off the lights. Holding a flashlight, I sat on the couch and waited for anything to happen. Hours seemed to stretch into minutes. While the storm persisted, I continued to glance out the windows. Then something sounded. A faint tapping sound emanated from the rear entrance. I felt my heart skip a beat as I turned to face it. I saw the person there once again through the glass door. This time it was directly on the porch, so it was closer. Another burst of lightning revealed a face to me. It was pallid, and it was gazing right at me with black eyes. I let out a cry and toppled down, losing the torch. I fumbled to get it, but the figure was gone when I shined it at the door. I had no idea what to do. My thoughts were racing with uncertainty and anxiety. I made the decision to go underground. I sprinted over to the closet beneath the stairs and slithered in. I shut the door and made an effort to relax my breathing. I could hear thunder rumbling sometimes and the rain beating down on the roof. Time moved slowly by. I listened for any indications of the intruder while remaining as silent as possible. I was tricked by my imagination into believing that I could hear footsteps and whispering. I could not move for fear. At last, fatigue overcame me and I fell asleep. I was unconscious for however long, but when I woke up, voices could be heard. These sounds were familiar, yet they were shouting my name. I glanced out the closet door after opening it. The light flooded the home after the storm had passed. With caution, I opened the door to find my mother, brother, and sister waiting for me in the living room. They were both relieved and anxious. "Tommy, how are you doing?" My mother hurried to give me a hug and asked. With tears welling up in my eyes, I nodded. I continued, my voice quivering. "I saw someone outside and I heard someone calling my name from upstairs." My mother gave me a strong embrace. "Tommy, it's all right. We've arrived here. You're secure." Feeling nervous, I glanced around the room. Although the home appeared to be normal once more, I couldn't get rid of the impression that something had happened. According to my mother, the storm and my isolation were likely the only things feeding my imagination. But I knew deep down what I heard and saw. I would never forget the impression that night had on me. Years later, I can still picture the person standing in the rain and hear the voice shouting my name. The night was stormy. Thunder screamed in the sky like a beast as rain beat down on the windows. My mother was visiting me at her office, a big office building that seemed strangely deserted after work. My mom frequently worked late shifts, so I would occasionally stay with her since I had nowhere else to go. The workplace was silent, the type of silence that makes you acutely aware of every noise the structure produces, like creaks and groans. My mom was typing on her computer as I completed my schoolwork at a desk in the corner. With each flash of the lightning outside, the lengthy shadows formed by the light from her desk lamp swirled over the space. I eventually felt the want to use the restroom. The bathrooms were in a different area of the building, as my mother pointed out to me. My footsteps reverberated across the dimly lighted hallways as I moved. Though muted, the sound of the storm outside persisted, serving as a continual reminder of the unstable weather. I was struck by how different this area of the building seemed as soon as I arrived at the restroom. It was older, with fluorescent lights that flickered and fading wallpaper. This area seemed more isolated from the rest of the building due to its colder air. I entered the restroom by pushing open the door. The room was filled with an unnerving glow as the fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. There was a row of sinks with a big mirror over them, and 3 unoccupied stalls. While cleaning my hands, I saw some motion in the mirror. I noticed a woman standing behind me as I looked up. In the fading light, her white hijab appeared to be glowing. She was still, as if she were a statue, and her countenance was inscrutable. I did, however, manage to give her a grin before hurriedly exiting the restroom. Heart thumping in my chest, I rushed back to my mother's desk. The workplace shadows became darker, and the outside storm seemed to be becoming louder. I sat back down and tried to ignore the bad sensation as I worked on my assignments. I told my mother about the woman later. I told her about the white hijab and how still she seemed. With a perplexed look on her face, my mother looked up from her work, but she remained silent. She simply nodded before getting back to typing. Although I found it odd, I didn't bring it up. Like my mom, I figured the woman was merely a coworker who worked late. The storm didn't seem to be abating as the night wore on. My mother eventually completed her job and we got ready to go. Just as we were gathering our belongings, my mother spoke out. She spoke in a soft, almost hesitant tone. She asked, her gaze not meeting mine. "You said you saw a woman in a white hijab?" "Yes," I answered. "From the restroom. Why?" After inhaling deeply, my mother turned to look at me. "My colleagues don't all have white hijabs on. There are no white hijabs worn here at all. Surely you must have seen her." I felt a chill go down my spine. I gave a nod, recalling how the woman had remained still, staring at me intently in the mirror. My mother's expression darkened. We requested to view the camera video from the corridor outside the restroom as she guided me to the security office. The security officer, a rough-and-tumble man with a full mustache, was first hesitant, but my mother's persistence won him over. Together, we viewed the shaky black-and-white film of the empty corridor. I witnessed myself going to the restroom and entering. I emerged a few minutes later, hurrying and appearing a little pale. However, the woman wearing the white hijab was nowhere to be seen. During that period, no one else had gone into or out of the restroom. I could see the worry in my mother's eyes as the security man shrugged and murmured something about the cameras not catching everything. We quietly exited the office after she thanked the security officer. Homeward travel was stressful. The storm persisted and the windshield wipers found it difficult to keep up with the pouring rain. My mother continued to look at me, her expression a mixture of perplexity and fear. I was at a loss for words. There was no sign of the woman on the video, even though she had seemed so present and genuine. I was unable to sleep that evening. I could always see the woman with the white hijab standing behind me in the mirror, her eyes black and expressionless, every time I closed my eyes. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and the more I thought about it, the uneasier I became. My mother made an effort to comfort me over the course of the following several days, telling me that it was probably just a trick of the light, or that I was just delusional. However, I knew in my heart what I had witnessed, and I didn't imagine it. After a few weeks, I stopped going to see my mother at work. I couldn't get rid of the memories of that evening, and I kept thinking that the woman in the white hijab was still out there, observing. Thursday night was peaceful. I had just returned after an exhausting workday. My mind was exhausted and my feet hurt. I was excited to unwind on the sofa and enjoy some television. Something seemed off as soon as I entered my apartment door, but I was unable to identify what it was. I ignored it and stepped inside. It was dark in the living room as I went for the light switch. I gasped when the light flickered on. There was a man sitting on my couch. With his head bowed, he gazed at the ground. I felt motionless and my heart was thumping loudly in my chest. This man, who was he? How was it that he entered my apartment? I inhaled deeply and made an effort to control my voice. You are who you are? How come you're here? My voice trembled as I asked. Slowly, the guy raised his head to look at me. His face was pallid, his eyes hollow and gloomy. He simply looked at me, expressionless for a long time. I stepped back, thinking quickly. Must I flee? Do I need to contact the police? I reached inside my backpack for my phone and phoned 911. The man got up as I was waiting for the operator to respond. His clothing were tattered and filthy, and he had a tall and lean build. My pulse raced even faster as he moved closer to me. What is your emergency, 911? The phone rang and the operator's voice answered. I made an effort not to lose my cool when I mentioned that there was a stranger in my flat. I was advised to stay on the line by the operator, who promised me that the cops were on their way. Without saying anything, the man kept staring at me. I couldn't take my eyes off of him for fear that he may take action. I waited for the cops to come, and the minutes seemed like hours. At last, I heard the distant wail of sirens. I felt a wave of relief knowing that assistance was on its way. The cops showed rather fast and stormed inside the flat. As they were taking him into custody, the man did not struggle. Stunned by what had transpired, I watched as they carried him away. To record my statement, one of the cops stayed behind. I told him what I knew, not that I knew much. I was clueless about the man's identity and his method of entry into my residence. I sat on the couch trying to figure out what had happened after the cops departed. I was relieved as well as afraid. Even though I was protected, it was unsettling to consider a stranger in my house. Not wishing to spend the night alone, I made the decision to spend it at a friend's place. I couldn't quit thinking about the man the next day. To find out whether they had any further information, I gave the police a call. I spoke with an officer, and he informed me that the man was my next-door neighbor. He went by Michael and has a history of mental health issues. He had accidentally strolled into my apartment while not taking his medicine. It stunned me. Michael and I had crossed paths, but we had never spoken words. He was quiet and reticent all the time. The idea that he had been in my place astounded me. Michael was now in jail, the police informed me, and he would get the assistance he required. I made an effort to resume my regular schedule, but I was disturbed by the whole thing. I was unable to get rid of the uneasy sensation. I made sure nobody was in any of the rooms every time I got home. I built a security system and replaced the locks on my doors. I wanted to feel secure once more in my own house. I received another call from the cops a few weeks later. They informed me that Michael was being charged for breaking and had been taken into custody. Knowing that he would never be allowed back into my apartment gave me a feeling of closure. However, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Michael. I hoped he would get the care he needed since he was a troubled guy. Things gradually returned to normal, although I was more watchful. I made sure my doors were always closed and became more aware of my surroundings. The whole affair had served as a wake-up call, showing me that unanticipated things might happen even in a calm area. I lived in a peaceful area the previous winter. Despite its tiny size, my home was sufficient for me. I liked spending my nights by myself, reading a nice book or watching TV. I shall never forget what unusual occurred to me one night in November. It was a chilly evening. The leaves were rustling in the ferocious wind outside. After supper, I made the decision to watch a movie. I made some popcorn, turned down the lights, and took a blanket and seat on the sofa. In the film, a detective works to solve a mystery. It was thrilling, and I gave it my whole attention. Abruptly, I detected a sound. From the back of the house came a gentle thump. I put the movie on hold and paid close attention. I initially believed it may be the wind, but then I heard it once more. Something or someone seemed to be moving outdoors based on the sound. I moved to the window after getting off the couch. I saw nothing as I peered out into the dark backyard. I convinced myself it was all in my head and returned to the sofa. I sat down and the noise started up again, only louder. My heart began to pound. I chose to investigate it. Reaching for a flashlight, I made my way to the rear entrance. I carefully opened it and went outdoors. I shuddered as the chilly breeze struck my face. I swept the yard with the flashlight, but I didn't notice anything strange. A voice caught my ear as I turned to head back inside. "Who is present?" In an attempt to appear courageous, I called out. The sound of the rustling leaves and the wind were all that could be heard. A shiver went down my spine. With haste, I returned inside and shut the door. I went back to the living room, but I was no longer able to focus on the film. I couldn't stop thinking about the whisper and the sound. I made the decision to forget about it and go to bed early. After making sure all the windows and doors were shut, I switched off the TV and walked upstairs to my bedroom. Once more, I heard the rumbling while I lay in bed. This time it was coming from inside the home. My chest throbbed with my heartbeat. I arose and paid attention. The basement was the source of the noise. I stored some old boxes and tools in my modest basement. I didn't often go down there. I felt compelled to investigate it. After taking up a baseball bat from my closet, I headed downstairs carefully. I was coming closer to the basement entrance as the noise level increased. I opened the door after taking a big breath. It was chilly and dark in the basement. Turning on the light, I took a quick glance around. Everything appeared to be typical. Just as I turned to head back upstairs, I heard footsteps. They emerged from behind a substantial stack of crates. I approached the boxes while keeping a firm grip on the bat. My hands trembled. A shadow moved as I drew nearer. "Who's there?" I yelled as I came to a halt. Emerging from behind the boxes was a guy. His hair was untidy, his eyes were wild, and he was tall and slender. He held a knife in his hand and was dressed in filthy clothing. I thought my heart was about to burst. I knew I had to leave that place. He sidestepped the bat as I swung it at him. I was able to dodge the knife as he came at me. With the man directly after me, I rushed as fast as I could up the steps. I secured the basement door after slamming it shut. Running back to the living room, I reached over to the coffee table and took my phone. I was having trouble dialing the phone since my hands were trembling so badly. "Tell 911 about your emergency," the operator inquired. "My home is occupied by a man," I said. "He's trying to kill me." "Remain composed. Which address do you have?" she inquired. I handed her my address and she announced the arrival of assistance. I could still hear him pounding on the door to the basement. Before he burst through, I realized I had to leave the home. I dashed onto the street from the front door. I didn't mind that it was chilly and dark. All I wanted was to be secure. Running over, I knocked on my neighbor's door. They allowed me in after opening it. They phoned the police again after I informed them of what had transpired. Even though it was only a few minutes, it felt like hours while we waited. When the cops showed up, they entered my home. The guy was still attempting to force the door open when they discovered him in the basement. He was taken away and placed under arrest. According to the authorities, the man was a wanted individual. He had spent days hiding down in my basement looking for the perfect opportunity to strike. I was fortunate to have avoided injury. I was unable to sleep alone in my residence again after that night. For a while, I lived with a friend until I felt secure once more. Even though I'm thankful to still be alive, the recollection of that night haunts me. I discovered that I should never take for granted my safety and to constantly be mindful of my surroundings. I was a night shift worker at the gas station. The nights were calm and the hours were long. Generally, nothing noteworthy occurred. In addition to stocking the shelves and cleaning the counters, I would occasionally assist a client in need of a snack or gas. However, I shall never forget what occurred to me one night. Like any other night, it began. I was reading a book behind the counter to kill time. Towards midnight, the petrol station was deserted. The darkness outside seemed much more pronounced due to the brilliant lights within. The refrigerator's hum and the odd passing automobile on the highway were the only sounds audible. Abruptly, I noticed dazzling spotlights outside. Nobody got out of the automobile as it came up to the pump. I waited a bit to see whether the driver would approach the car. A man emerged from behind the closed door after a short while. His hair was disheveled and his clothing appeared to have been left in the laundry for several days. He was tall and slender. He approached the door almost stumbling as he moved slowly. I could see he was nervous as he got inside. With trembling palms, he kept glancing about uneasily. He just didn't seem quite right. Without a word, he approached the counter and just gazed at me. There was perspiration on his brow and his eyes were very wide. "Could I be of assistance to you?" I asked, attempting to seem serious. He remained silent. Rather, he simply continued to gaze at me. My heart began to beat faster. I had no idea what to do. I looked at the phone, unsure if I should make a help call, but before I could decide, he said anything. "Do you possess a restroom?" His question came out shakily. I pointed to the door at the end of the aisle and answered, "Yes, it's in the back." He turned to face the restroom after giving a nod, remaining warily scanning the surroundings. I felt nervous as I watched him go. I couldn't quite place it, but there seemed to be something strange about him. I attempted to ignore the emotion and resumed reading my book, but I found it difficult to focus. I kept staring at the restroom door, hoping he would emerge. He remained inside for some minutes after that. I was getting more and more nervous. How long could he have been in there? I made the decision to look. I moved cautiously in the direction of the bathroom door, my pulse racing. I gave a mild knock. "Is everything in there in order?" I inquired. An answer was not forthcoming. I knocked once more forcefully. "Are you all right, sir?" I inquired once more. Still no response. A surge of terror swept through me. What if he'd experienced some kind of trauma? After a brief moment of hesitation, I opened the door. I carefully opened it and took a quick look inside. There was nobody in the bathroom. He had vanished. A shiver went down my spine. How did he get away? I searched the petrol station, but he was nowhere to be seen. He appeared to have disappeared into thin air. Feeling more nervous than ever, I returned to the counter. I made the decision to give my manager a call to inform him of the situation. It was headlights outside again as I extended my hand to grab the phone. There was another automobile approaching the pump. That was a taxi this time. The driver stepped outside and made his way to the door. His grin was warm, and he was an older man. After entering, he had a look around. He asked, coming up to the desk, "Busy night?" I tried to grin and responded, "Not really. Just a few minutes ago, I had an unusual customer." "Whoa, what took place?" His expression was worried as he questioned. I informed him about the nervous man who had disappeared into the restroom. The taxi driver paid close attention to what I said and nodded. He remarked, "That sounds strange. You ought to use caution. You can never be sure who you will meet." I told him, feeling a little better after our conversation. "I appreciate the guidance." Again grinning, he responded, "No problem. I will be available if you need anything. Simply honk for assistance." I answered, "Thanks," feeling a little more secure with his being close by. I saw the cab driver drive off as he returned to his vehicle. Although I felt a little better, my uneasiness persisted. I returned to my book, but it was difficult for me to focus. I continued scanning my surroundings, almost expecting the nervous man to show up again. After several hours, nothing further occurred. The petrol station stayed silent while I made an effort to unwind. But just when I believed there would be no more frights that night, I noticed headlights outside once again. The identical automobile that had come up to the pump earlier made my heart skip a beat. The uneasy man emerged once more, appearing much more uneasy than before. I felt a rush of panic go over me as he approached the door. I looked around to see whether the taxi driver was still in the area, but he wasn't there. The nervous man entered and approached the counter. His keen, wide eyes were fixed on me once more. My hands began to shake, but I made an effort to remain composed. "Could I be of assistance to you?" My voice trembled as I asked. He remained silent. Rather than that, he took a piece of paper out of his pocket. Without saying a word, he handed it to me. Shaking, my hands accepted it. The lettering on the old, worn paper was difficult to read. It appeared to be a map of some sort. "What is this?" Confused, I asked. He remained silent. His sharp eyes simply kept looking at me. A surge of terror swept through me. I had no idea what he wanted, and I had no desire to find out. Trying to seem brave, I responded, "I think you should leave." He remained still. He just continued to look at me. My heart began to beat faster. I looked about in the hopes of seeing the taxi driver, but he was nowhere to be seen. I had no idea what to do. There was a honk outside at that moment. I noticed the cabbie's vehicle as I looked up. He was back. A sigh of relief washed over me. The taxi driver exited his vehicle and made his way to the entrance. The uneasy guy looked from me to him and back again. Now he appeared much more anxious. "Is everything in this place okay?" the taxi driver questioned while glancing at the uneasy man. The nervous man did not respond. Without further comment, he simply turned and left through the door. I watched as he climbed into his vehicle and drove off, the headlights fading into the night. "Are things going well for you?" The taxi driver approached the counter and inquired. I shook my head and responded, "I think so. I appreciate you returning." He grinned and answered, "No problem. I advised you to just honk if you needed anything." With a slight sense of relief, I thanked him. For the remainder of my shift, the cab driver remained with me, and nothing else occurred. I thanked him again in the morning, and he drove off. That nervous man was never seen again. But that evening, I never forgot it. I was happy to have someone beside me to support me throughout the scariest night of my life.